Day 3 in Vegas. I'm usually the guy that gets either the morning of day 2 or the morning of day 3 because I'm big and I'm loud. And I know that most of the time whenever we're going to be talking about technology today, you start to see the last names of Gates and Wozniak and people get very, very excited. And then I walk out. And I'm going to tell you why I'm fine with that. Because even yesterday, whenever I got to this hotel and I went to check in, I got up to the front desk. I handed the gentleman, I handed him my ID, and I handed him my card. And, he starts checking me in, and he's looking down, and he's starting to type in my name, and he gets this little smirk in the corner of his mouth. And I know what's coming. And he sees the glasses and kind of like the pasty kind of technology kind of complexion that I have, and he looks up at me, and for the 5 millionth time, I hear, "So, you related to Bill Gates?" So I'll start today by simply dispelling that rumor that no, I'm not. But it's something that has always led to an interesting introduction throughout my entire life. But today we're here in Vegas, and I'm here to talk about social media. There is no greater place in the world to be able to talk about social media than Las Vegas. This is the world's greatest social media laboratory to see in action what I'm going to talk about today. I mean, this was a town that had the greatest advertising campaign of all time. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And that happened until Facebook and Twitter came out, because now whatever happens in Vegas stays on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything else. So they had to change their campaign because it didn't work anymore. I mean, social media changed the entire identity of a town. So my day job, and as you could tell from my introduction, my comically long title is that I'm the Vice President and Senior Creative Director for Global Brand Design for Starwood Hotels and Resorts. We have 9 design-led luxury lifestyle brands. We have more luxury hotels and more destinations around the world than anybody else. They range from the very high end with St. Regis down through Westin, Sheraton, some more select serve brands like that. And the one thing that we want to do above everything else is to create loyalty beyond reason. And so today I want to talk a little bit about how we do that with social media. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of a sense that I have some idea of what I'm talking about, last year there's an independent think tank called L2. They went through and they rated all of the best global hotel brands. We took 5 of the top 10 spots. W Hotels took number 1. It was the only one that received a Genius ranking. And then also a few months ago, Condé Nast ranked the top 10 companies that got Twitter right. We're one company, but somehow we ended up being listed twice, which was nice but slightly confusing. As both Sheraton and W were listed on that list. So let's look at a few kind of just quick generic numbers to give you this kind of the sense of the scope of social media. So right now, Facebook has about 1.2 billion users, but that's not the interesting fact. The interesting fact to me is that 23% of them check their account at least 5 times a day, which is staggering to me. It wasn't quite as staggering as yesterday. I heard the average person unlocks their phone 125 times. Like, that's insane. But just it's not only the volume, but the frequency with which people are doing things here that's so important. Twitter has 300 million monthly users that are generating 400 million tweets a day. And then in the time that I've been up here on this stage, YouTube has had 100 hours of video uploaded to their site. I mean, so these are just massive engagement numbers. And I think, that this is really one of those things where, we engaged in about 3 million social media interactions with our guests last year to really try to provide kind of on-the-spot customer service. And so I want to kind of walk you through some of the things and some of the logic behind that. And we'll start with just a very, very simple question of kind of like, the numbers are great, you can see them all the time, but what does all this mean? And I think I'm always that guy that tries to question what's going on and what do things mean. And so being the inquisitive person that I am, last year for me, this kind of all started with an experiment. And it was something that I ended up calling the inverse Facebook experiment. And it came out of a very, very interesting interaction that happened between 2 of my friends in New York City. I had 2 friends that ran into each other. One friend was somebody who I see all the time. We hang out all the time, we go to dinner, there's a real good friendship there. He ran into another one of my friends who I don't see that often. And the friend who I see all the time realized that the friend I don't see very often could only speak about me in Facebook posts. So that it was one of those things where he knew a lot about me, but it would only, if you ever kind of tried to scratch below the surface, there just wasn't a whole lot of content there. And so this really got me thinking about kind of what has social media done to just the fabric of society and the fabric of friendship. So I thought about this for a long time, and I came up with this experiment that had 2 rules that I thought were fairly simple. The first one was that whenever I looked at all my Facebook friends, I had to have been friends with them for at least a year on Facebook. I thought that was an incredibly low bar to be able to get over. It's like a year is a long time. And the other thing was that during that year, we had to have had at least one meaningful interaction. And again, I tried to set the bar very low. We had a telephone call, we went out to dinner if we lived far away, even a meaningful email exchange. I thought this was something that should not be a hard thing to get over. And so what I ended up looking at was that I had about 325 Facebook friends at the time. And you should also know about me that I'm not Facebook friends with just anybody. Like, I love you guys. I'm sure that you're all awesome. You're really smart. At the end of this, I'm not going to be friends on Facebook. Sorry, I'm not that guy. But so these are people that I had a legitimate connection with, and I applied those 2 rules to them to see what was going to happen. And I could not believe the results, because what happened was that 200 of those 300 people, 2/3 of them didn't make the cut. And I could not figure out why. And so I thought about this for a really long time, and what do I want to do about this? And what I ended up doing was to try to do a social experiment. I defriended all of them. And so after 3.5 months, I looked at the results. And the fascinating results were that 95% of those friends did not notice. To this day, have no idea that I've defriended them. And these are people that I had a legitimate connection with. I saw some other interesting things. 3% of the people saw and they tried to reconnect with me. But it was much more in that, like, hey, can we just be Facebook friends again? And I'm like, no, look, we need to go out to dinner. We need to do something. I'm going to follow the rules. I'm going to follow through with it. But the most fascinating thing about all this was that 2% of the people absolutely hated me. Hated. Like I had called their kid ugly, I had kicked their dog. These are people that to this day will not speak to me. Will not. And because they came to me and they're like, I thought we were better friends than this. And I said, we are. All I did was to just cut a connection on social media. It's like that was it. I mean, this was not some great kind of thing that I'd done to them. And I thought about this more and more. And it really got to the place where, I started to realize something. And what that was is that social media has truly become, for so many people, social surrogacy. That these little micro interactions, these little connections that we have actually transplanted and replaced genuine connections for so many people. And I think that for me, it was a fascinating kind of comment on society. It was a fascinating look at kind of where we are. But the other thing that it really made me think about with this was that these people were my friends and they didn't really notice what was going on. I mean, so honestly, when you talk about social media and you talk about a bar being that thin, you have to ask yourself, what chance does your brand have? Because there was a time where if you wanted to be a part of a community, you had to get in a car and go somewhere. If you wanted to buy something, you had to go to this weird place called a mall. If you wanted to read something, there was this even weirder place called a library that you had to go to with like a card catalog. And those things just don't exist anymore. So, I mean, this is one of those things that we constantly have to look at. And, so this is what I'm going to go through 10 insights today. And the first one is you have to constantly work to identify trends. And the other thing that was really fascinating about this was that I knew that I had this keynote coming up. And I'd been getting these little pestering emails from LinkedIn, kind of saying like, hey, you can post stuff on LinkedIn now, you can post articles. And I've written a blog for about 10 years, so I picked up this article about the inverse Facebook experiment, and I posted it last week. LinkedIn featured it on their social media channel, has like 2 million followers. They featured it on Big Ideas and Innovation. It's been, I don't know what, in a week it's been read by like 10,000 people, but it's been flooded with comments. This is so relevant, this is so topical, this is so now, this is so the things that we have to be talking about. And the thing that none of those people know is that I did that experiment in 2009. Right. So again, and these are not slouches for what's going on here, but this is why you have to constantly work to identify trends, because I think, so often people just kind of look at data like that and think that they have the insight. But again, you have to really work to try to stay ahead of the trend on this stuff. So let's look at kind of what are the 3 basic questions. Anytime we work on anything, there are 3 questions that we always ask ourselves. The first one is what, and in this case, the what is very simple. We all know what social media is. There's the how of how do people use social media and how does it affect them. We just talked about that. But the last thing, the biggest thing that I find most brands, most leaders, most anything cannot answer is why. Why do people do what they do? And especially with social media, why do people behave the way that they do with social media? And I think that this is not necessarily an obvious answer, but it's one that I want to walk you through today. So to be able to answer that, I want to introduce you to someone. So I'd like you to meet potatoes. And, oh yeah, no, it gets worse. So the first thing that I'll tell you about potatoes is that no children were involved in the naming of this dog. This was not like where the kids were like, we're going to name the dog Dog or Stay or something. No, like 2 adults named the dog Potatoes. The other thing is that I live in New York City and my 2 friends have this dog named Potatoes. And whenever Potatoes' family got married, Potatoes had a choice to make. And what Potatoes did was the only logical thing any modern dog would do, is that Potatoes took a hyphenated last name. While the names have been changed to protect the innocent, the story is real. But so my Facebook timeline is now filled with potatoes. And all kinds of different potatoes. We have bath time potatoes. We have Mexican Halloween potatoes. And my personal favorite, and I swear I am not making this up, drunk potatoes. This is what social media has become. Is this being filled with the dog drinking the martini? How did we get here? And like I said before, why did we get here? And I'll tell you why. Because social media lets you see just how boring all your friends are. My God, I don't care that you got a latte and you walked the dog and you went to the dry cleaner. Nobody cares. Oh, but this is the thing. Now we all can see into all of our little lives. And now the problem is you see that we didn't care what's going on in them. But so what's happened out of this is a trend that I think is incredibly important for this. And what that trend is that it's made everybody start to act like little brands. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And by acting like little brands, they start to do the same thing that brands do. One is that they constantly want to curate how often they change the image that they show the world. You want to do a fun experiment? See how many times a week your friends change their profile photo. I see a bunch of you, whenever I put that slide up, start snickering, so I know you probably did it this week with photos that you took here in Vegas. I'm not going to ask anybody to put their hands up, but you know who you are. And of course, these days, we can't just have regular profile photos. We have to have ones like this of my friend like Casey, because regular ones just aren't that interesting. And so we start to do other things with this. And one of them is the wonderful trend of selfies. The wonderful trend that no one can capture the glory of me but me. This is a true story. So a couple weeks ago, my wife and I were in Miami, and we're at one of our favorite restaurants that we go to, and we're sitting on South Beach. And whenever we're sitting there, 4 friends sit down next to us. And it's the birthday of one of the women that's there. And my wife and I are chatting, and all of a sudden I kind of look up and realize that one of the friends is about halfway into our table, trying to dislocate the better part of his upper body, craning his hand out to take a selfie. So my wife, being the nice person that she is, kind of stops him, and she said, "Oh, sir," she said, "if you want, I'm happy to take the photo for you." The reaction was priceless. He got pissed. And he looks at her and he goes, "No, why would you want to do that?" And she said, "Well, because it'd be easier." And he goes, No, it's not a selfie then." I'm just glad in this day and age, if we're going to protect the sanctity of anything, that we all are kind of trying to protect the sanctity of the selfie. I mean, the selfie, one of the 2 great contributions to the English language last year, along with twerking, were the 2 things, right. But this is why. Is because all of a sudden we have to control our own brand. We have to take all of our own selfies because we need to be able to control stuff like this. And you also kind of look at how people want to create their own unique tone of voice. As you can see, mine tends to be a little bit more running to kind of the dry sense of humor. But most people on Twitter, I know my friends on Twitter, I know that they are not that deep, but somehow whenever they're on Twitter, they turn into like Yoda if he wrote like 140 character long fortune cookies. Where like we all just have to be so profound and so interesting because our tone of voice has to be so good. But everybody works so hard to be able to create this tone of voice for them. And you also see these things where people genuinely want content that's going to let them stand out from the crowd. They have to document major achievements in their life. They have to kind of show how they're cooler than everybody else. For me, like, I had something that was very cool recently that made me very, very happy that I had to document. And it was just one of those things where, yes, actually the real grumpy cat started following me, and I felt the need to document that. This made me far happier than it should have, I know. But that's the thing. But this is what it is it's kind of like, this is how we have to stand out. If something as inane as a cat following you, whatever psychological issues there are around that. But the other thing that you see happening is that, we need content to stand out from the crowd. But like I said before, we're not all that interesting all the time. We're not fascinating constantly. So what did we do? We created Flashback Friday and Throwback Thursday and all these other, kind of things. So it's like, hey, now you can pick from the archive of your entire life, back to when you were a child sometimes, to be able to pick out the things that were fascinating just for you. So once again, you can stand out from the crowd. And so, you see all these things over and over. And what I term it as is that people want experiential currency. And that this, for me, is the new economy that's driving so much in social, and it's driving the new digital economy. And what experiential currency is that it's currency that comes from content and experiences that's created by your brand. This is something that we do a huge part with our brands, from the way that our hotels are designed, from the events that we put on, from the interactions that we want to have with our guests. We want them to be unique, to be able to give them the photos, the information, all of these different types of things to be able to let them stand out from their friends. And then what you see is they then take that currency and they spend it back into their social networks. Through tweets, through check-ins, through photos, for all these different things. This is what really drives, a lot of these interactions. And I think the other thing that you're going to see, and I truly believe this, is that whenever you look at the current generation of millennials, this is the first generation that I think is going to embrace the concept of social bankruptcy. Because this is the first generation whose entire lives have been documented online since birth. And I think that there's a certain point where whenever that becomes a real problem. I mean, one of the stories I have is there's one of the team members that I work with all the time, this incredibly talented young woman who's on our mobile team. And I'd sent her a Facebook request a while ago, and it just kind of hung out there and never got approved. And so one day we're at lunch, and I kind of called her on it. I said, well, look, why aren't we friends on Facebook? And she kind of did this thing, and she's like, because I know you're a smart ass, and there are photos on there since high school that I don't want you to get a hold of. And literally, whenever she applied for the job with us, she hired a consultant to go back through her entire social history and make recommendations on what were the photos that needed to be removed. So again, I think you have an entire generation that is trying to run a brand without understanding the complexities of running a brand and the long-term problems with that. So that's why I really think that this concept of social bankruptcy is something that is going to be very, very real very, very soon. And I think, this leads me to my second insight, which I said before, is more than anything, understand why people, understand why your consumers, understand why the people that you are interacting with are using social media. Not just what it is and not just how it is, but why, because that will lead you to genuine solutions with genuine insights that will really create something special and create great interactions for them. So the other great way to be able to kind of show social media and to show why doing things without using that experiential currency is a bad idea is to show you kind of a few less than wonderful examples. One of my recent favorite ones was from SpaghettiOs, who thought that it would be a great idea to commemorate the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the loss of all those troops with a patriotic SpaghettiO. Right. And so I think that was one of those things that was up there for an hour, and then they decided how bad of an idea that was and pulled it down. You start to see brands that will start to chase trends. One of the biggest trends in social media right now is a thing called real-time marketing. It started with Oreo probably about 2 Super Bowls ago when the lights went out. They created a tweet that said you can still dunk in the dark. And it started to kind of be retweeted about 10,000 times a second. And you see brands trying to do this all the time. One great example was with the producer, artist, one of the most fashionable men in the world, Pharrell Williams, showed at the Grammys this year with this Vivienne Westwood hat that certainly made an impression. And a great example of how to do that, a great example of how to get noticed, came from Arby's. I can't say the last time I talked about Arby's, but that was a great reaction. I'm still never going to go eat there. But like it was a great reaction. But what you then see is you see all these other brands try to copy it. And again, not understanding what it is, not understanding kind of the social currency aspect of these things. You look at a brand like JCPenney's, who tried to do it with the Super Bowl this year. And you started to see tweets like this. And this was not just because I'm a designer, the fact that I can't type. These were some of the literal tweets that they had started sending up. And you started to see them commenting on the game. And see if you can guess what the point of this was. And so after a while, this started to become a real buzz, but not for a very good reason. And they ended up kind of saying that, the whole point was that they were trying to promote mittens that they were trying to sell. I personally am of the mind that I think making your brand look like it's completely insane may not be the best strategy. But the other thing that happens is if you're going to do an execution like this and it doesn't go too well, you open the door for other brands to be able to kind of come after you. Kia personally had one of my favorite responses to JCPenney's. Yeah. And so again, I think, you open yourself up if you don't understand social media to things like this. And to really and there were a bunch of these that were good, like this was just one of my favorite ones, to be able to do stuff like this. Wheat thins, and I see brands do this all the time where it's like, hey, let's run out and let's just try to get a lot of really pointless interactions. Because one of the things I think so many brands get so incredibly confused about is the difference between likes and engagement. And this is one of those things where it's not that hard to be able to get people to go out and like something, to run up a whole bunch of likes. You've seen brands spend tens, if not hundreds of $1 millions on advertising to like us. Like us, like us, like us, like us, like us. But the problem is, after great, I've liked you, why? What is it? I mean, aside from the fact that you have this huge number of people who follow you now see this mad scramble in boardrooms around the country where people are now trying to justify and monetize the value of a like. And I've heard anything from 2 cents to $169. I'm fairly sure Facebook told me that higher number. But this is why, is because, you're doing this and there's no meaningful interaction. Whenever you try to engage with these groups, you don't see any reaction to it. You can't monetize it into anything. And it becomes a really serious problem with this. One of the other things that you see a lot of companies doing right now is turning to automation. They know they want to be on social media, but they really don't feel like authenticity and true interactions have a problem. This was something that I'd put on Instagram. Living in New York City, we got hit with Hurricane Sandy about 2 years ago. My neighborhood was out of power for about 10 days, and as you can tell, Con Edison, who is our power company, was not doing the best job, and one of my neighbors decided to, in a very, very big way, advertise that fact on his front lawn. And so I put it up on Instagram and said, we still don't have power. Con Edison's response has been nothing short of pathetic. Anybody want to guess who the first brand was that liked the photo? Yep. So they had this wonderful automated strategy that was just going to like anything that had Con Edison mentioned in it, and they kind of forgot that, when there's a disaster, maybe we should go turn that off. Because, and that's the thing, is I think, this is the place where this was a brand at a time that, people didn't need hollow likes. These are people that needed hope. And that social media should have been the channel that they turned to be able to give people information, be able to give them hope about what was going on, not just kind of have this brain dead strategy of just liking anything that's out there. I think automation can have its place in social media, but nothing is ever going to replace real authentic connections. And so that's really kind of my point to all of this, is when you look at so many of these examples, I see so many different executions of social media, you really see that if there is no experiential currency, if there's no real understanding of why you need to do the things that you do, there is no meaningful engagement. You may have huge numbers, but you're not going to have happy guests, you're not going to have interactions, you're not going to have a brand connection with it, and it's just going to be hollow. And it took them 2 seconds to hit that like button, it'll take them 1 second to hit that unlike button and just be able to forget about you. So I think, this is one of my things, and I see so many companies doing this right now for this insight, is they treat social media more like advertising. We're going to run in, we're going to do a campaign, we're going to run up a bunch of likes, we're going to run away. It is not a PR stunt, it is not an ad campaign, because the reality is that consumers expect the same type of interactions from brands that they expect from their friends. if they have a problem and they tweet you about it, they put it on Facebook, they are not waiting for an answer 4 days later. That's just not the way things work anymore. And I think the other biggest thing that I will say is that do not launch social media channels until you are legitimately ready to support them indefinitely. There are brands that we have to this day who we do not allow on Twitter and other social media networks because they have nothing to say, they do not have teams to be able to support them, and I refuse to put them on these channels just so that I can put it on a board deck and take it in front of our board of directors and say, hey, we're there. We have nothing to say. It's going to be a bad brand interaction. Customers are going to write to us and we're not going to write back. But hey, it was on a board deck. So I think this is one of those things that so often, the internet is littered with the digital wreckage of people who had to be on MySpace, of people who had to be in Second Life. They had to have a blog, they had a podcast, they had all this stuff they had to have, and they launch it and it sits there. And that is also a brand interaction. So let's take a quick look at how we use social media. And I think we use it in a number of different ways. And when we talk about social media, I think one of the things you need to understand is that we kind of have a two-tiered challenge in the way that we construct our social media strategy. And the reason why that is because guests can bond with our brands in two different ways. One is that you can like W as a global brand. You like the idea of design, music, fashion. Those are things that you really connect with. But the other part of that we also realize is that you can also bond with an individual property. Like for me, the W in Barcelona is one of my favorite properties in the world. The information that I want out of them is going to be very different. It's much more localized. It's much more events that are going on. So for us, we have to look at a global strategy that feeds to a local strategy and how those two things can work together. And so, this is that thing for us of kind of bringing global and local together to try to, create these really interesting experiences. One of the biggest ways that we obviously use social media for is for customer service. We took a very different approach to this. A lot of other companies went out, they ran out tons and tons of likes. We actually went much more infrastructure-led, and what that allowed us to do was to be able to really get social media integrated into our customer contact centers. It got it integrated into our properties, so that whenever a guest had a problem, that we could really interact with them and really create a strong bond. So this is the Facebook page for the Royal Hawaiian. It's a luxury collection property that we have in Hawaii. And we see this kind of stuff all the time where, a guest might write on there that, they've been one of our highest end members. They're a platinum guest. They've been that way for about 20 years, and that they're coming to the property. But they're fishing for an upgrade, which is fine. It's completely understandable. And the hotel writes them back and says, we're going to welcome them in. And they write back and say, that they're really happy about that. But the part about this is, as a generic of an interaction that makes me the happiest is when you look at the interaction times. Because the first comment was written at 4:45 p.m., the last one at 7:45 p.m. We have a global standard that all communications, you have to get back to our guests in no more than 4 hours. That's what we feel like is the longest acceptable window if somebody is having a problem or something that they need to interact with, is inside of that 4-hour window. I think the other thing that we've really kind of come to embrace when you look at something like our W Facebook page is that not everybody has a great experience. It's just simply part of it. And so in this case, we have somebody who is really disappointed with their stay. And obviously, we don't want to be discussing things like bills and things like that out in the open, but we want to be able to engage with them and to be able to try to make things better. Because the thing that we see time and time again is that so often the people who have had the worst experiences, who are the most pissed off, if you genuinely work with them, even if it's in a channel like Facebook, so often just through that effort will truly become some of your biggest advocates. And I think, this is one of the things that a lot of companies get a little bit leery about, and it's something that it took us a while to be able to kind of really make peace with, is that you have to monitor and respond to both positive and negative feedback. I see a lot of companies who just want to deal with the good. And and the bad stuff is kind of like, hey, if we don't answer it, it'll just go away. No, if you don't answer it, it means that, you're a brand that I'm probably not going to want to come back to again. So again, I think this is something that is really important to be able to do both of those. And I think that the other part of one of the big things that we do is that we create guidelines that really outline and enforce our rules of engagement for social media. So that as we look at our 9 customer contact centers around the world, as we look at all of our hundreds of associates that are involved in doing this work, there is a common way that everybody understands how we want to do things and how we want to engage with them, so that in that case there is consistency across all these different touch points. Well, obviously, we used it a lot for customer experience. There's probably, just take a look at a scenario. Let's say you're going to come to Las Vegas. And whenever you want to come to Las Vegas, you're going to go to one of our websites like Westin.com. You're going to do a search for Las Vegas. And whenever you get there, you're going to see that the Westin in Lake Las Vegas looks like a really nice place you want to go to. Go on to the property page, you look at the photos, and you see kind of the traditional photos that you're used to seeing. One of the things that we've started doing is that we're the first hotel company in the world that will actually publish unfiltered Instagram photos from that property. Because for us, again, we feel like that level of transparency to be able to truly show what's going on is incredibly important. And we'll also let you go through and filter it so that if you want to see what the food looks like, the dining room looks like, hotel rooms, the bed, any of that, we're going to let all of that through because we genuinely feel like that level of transparency, and not just simply us publishing out, but also then consuming this information back in, is incredibly important to bring this level of transparency because people genuinely want to see things like this. We've spent an incredible amount of effort over the last few years in mobile. In mobile, we've seen, 2 years ago, about 13% of our total global traffic came in through mobile. As of today, we're over 50%. And we have apps on iPad, iPhone, Android. We're bringing them to Windows. We have one on BlackBerry. And it's been a channel that for us is growing 5 times faster than what we saw the web growing at the same point in its life cycle. So if we look at something like the Starred Preferred Guest iPad app, whenever you go into the app, you're going to search for a hotel. Say you're going to come to New York. And whenever you get there, you're interested in the St. Regis, New York. There are a couple things right from the beginning to notice. One is that any of the local property feeds, in this case for Foursquare, for Facebook, for Twitter, for Weibo, for any of these channels will come right through, so you can immediately connect with the property. The other thing that we did is that we actually have a guest rating system. We're the first hotel company that had ever actually done unfiltered guest reviews. So good, bad, indifferent. These are people that we can verify have stayed at our hotels. So again, it's a slightly different take on social media. But again, we want that transparency, both good and bad, to be able to let that through. But so you're looking at the St. Regis, New York. And as you're scrolling through the interface, you get to this kind of local area section, and it shows you where the St. Regis is. But again, one of the things that we did was try to reverse the flow of information so that we're actually doing a curated feed from Foursquare to let Foursquare and to just let the world to be able to curate what is the type of information that you can see and be able to see what's going on around the hotel. In this case, the Modern is a restaurant that I really like at the Museum of Modern Art. It'll link me right to the website. But again, it's letting social media in a very different way and not just doing that, hey, we're on Facebook, hey, we're on Twitter, like us, like us, like us. But again, trying to kind of look at a very different interaction model. The other thing that we're doing a lot of work around is that whenever you come into the app, you can link your account with Facebook and you can link it with Twitter. And what that allows us to do is to be able to do these really targeted recommendations so that based on that, in behind my account section, it will actually recommend hotels just for me that I want to stay at. So in this case, it's pretty good because it knows that I want to stay at the W in Barcelona. But again, it's using that social graph to really be able to kind of get in so that you can understand what's going on. The other thing that I've not touched on here today at all is the fact that we do have apps that are in Chinese, and little things like Facebook and Twitter do not exist in China. You have to look at other networks like Weibo and Kaishen and a lot of other usability patterns, a lot of other usage that comes with those that you really have to understand. And so again, I think there are a couple insights here. One is to try to use that social graph, to be able to use the information that people have, to be able to create a much more robust big data model, to be able to create much more detailed and kind of much more interesting looks at how to create personalization based on the types of things that they've already done. And also to understand kind of global social networks. Again, it's not just the networks that we have here in North America that are so important. We obviously use it for surprise and delight. This is a big part of obviously some of the things that we want to be able to do. And some of the most powerful interactions that we have no ROI. And I think this was something that took us quite a while to be able to kind of really make peace with. Whenever you see something like the Sheraton New Orleans, we had a guest that wasn't having a very good interaction. We tweeted back to them asking if they wanted beer or snacks or wine and strawberries. I think they kind of thought we were blowing it off. But we actually kind of delivered this stuff to their room. And here again, I think that these are the types of things where you really see that we have to focus on the dialogue with our guests at every single point in their stay, no matter what. And to be able to actively engage with them, to be able to make things better, no matter what it is. And I think that the other key part about this is that, really kind of more than anything, we see that our teams are empowered to act on these opportunities. There's not a massive chain of command to be able to make a guest stay better. And so kind of one last example. So my wife is an incredibly harsh critic. We travel all over the world for things like that. She loves the W in Barcelona, and she loves the lattes that they have there. And so one day, just jokingly, she had written to them and kind of said, hey, I love the latte there. Is there anything you can do about that? She expected no response back from that. But the hotel actually took the time to be able to write back and said that, yes, they do actually FedEx. They were a little afraid that by the time it got there, it might be cold. But what they did was they actually ran downstairs and photographed one and sent it to her. To this day, she raves about that hotel and raves about everything like that. And that one of the things that proves more than anything is that your brand is never too big to make somebody feel special. There is no ROI attached to that interaction. There is no, kind of direct revenue that's going to come out of that. But just the advocate that you make out of somebody for that is astounding. And the last big insight that I want to talk about for us is that we have repositioned our entire company and all of our customer service channels around this idea that agile is the new smart. Because it used to be that you could take a whole lot of people, you could put them in a room, and we could say, look, we know where we're going to be from 2 years from now from a technology standpoint. The only thing that we know right now is that in 2 years we're going to be wrong. So that we have really repositioned our entire company to have a much more agile model in the way that we engage with our consumers, a more agile model in the way that we deal with technology, and really trying to be much, much more nimble to be able to bring these things to life without these huge chain of commands. And so I'll leave you as my time is running out with one last thought about this. Because I've worked in technology for a lot of years. I worked with companies like Apple and Google and all kinds of things. And one of the things that I think more than anything that is so incredibly important is that technology is not an idea. Whenever it comes to technology, when it comes to social media, everybody gets so caught up in whatever the new thing is, whatever the shiny toy is, and they start with the execution. They start meetings with, we have to be on Twitter. If you're trying to back into a reason, if you're trying to back into a customer interaction, you are not going to get to great experiences. Technology is not an idea. It is a pencil. It is no better than a pencil. If you have nothing to write, if you have nothing to say, it doesn't mean anything. And for us, the real magic of technology is how we enable our associates to connect with our guests to deliver great experiences. That, all the insights, all the design, all the technology, that's what we're trying to move forward with every day. So with that, that's my time. I thank you so much for everything. That seemed a lot less gratuitous when it was on my monitor. But so I've written my blog for about the past 10 years. You can find me on every social network in the world for that. And so thank you so much for everything.